Today's presentation is by Leanne Choboff. Leanne has more than 25 years of food service experience specializing in supply chain food safety and quality assurance. Currently, Leanne is the Vice President of Technical Affairs for the Safe Quality Food Institute, responsible for the technical elements of the SQF program, including the development, maintenance, and technical support of the SQF code and supporting materials. Take it away, Leanne.
Thanks, Jane. I appreciate the introduction, and I definitely appreciate the invitation from Exemplar Global to talk about this subject, tips in writing effective audit reports. As Jane said, I am the Vice President of Technical Affairs at SQF, and in my role and responsibility, we oversee the auditors, we oversee the certification bodies and the accreditation bodies. And one of the things that we have to look at and review are audit reports. And this is why I picked this subject, is to write effective audit reports, is because we have been seeing some issues in writing these audit reports. The issue with audit reports and how important they are. So that's the topic that I wanted to talk to you about today, or talk about today. So why are we here? Basically, I want to share with you about the importance of writing good objective evidence and having a good audit report. So I'm going to focus on writing good objective evidence within the audit report, because how important it is, and the consequences actually of not writing good objective evidence, and how that can turn your audit report around. I also want to share with you what our expectations are at SQF in writing clear and concise objective evidence for an overall better audit report, and how to do that, and some tips that we share with our auditors that I want to share with everybody listening today. And then I want to provide some examples of poor audit reports, and I think we learn specifically by what not to do as well as what to do. So I want to share examples of poor written objective evidence, and kind of give you a background. As Jane said, SQF is a food safety scheme, and so we are focused on food safety programs and auditing food safety programs that are based off of the certification bodies accredited to 17065 and based off the Global Food Safety Initiative's benchmarking requirements. So my examples are specific to food safety, but my tips can be applied to any type of audit that's being conducted out there. So objective evidence really is that window to the audit conclusions. It's so important because it really paints that window, and you don't know what's behind the window. It could be something embarrassing, it could be something good or bad, but that objective evidence is really what is reflective of what the auditor sees. And I keep saying that auditor is the eyes and ears of SQF. It's the eyes and ears to that certification body. When you have an accredited program like what SQF is about, you rely on the auditor to provide that evidence so that the certification body can make the right certification decision. So it's not the auditor that's issuing the certificate, it is the certification body. And the only way to do that is through what the conclusion is, and that's reflected in the audit evidence, the written evidence that the auditor provides. And the consequence of not writing good objective evidence, it can change your audit report. It can change it from passing to not passing, because what you're not providing, when an auditor doesn't provide that good evidence, then it is reflected, and then all it does is create confusion on the site. It creates confusion as to who's reading that audit report. And let's talk a little bit about who's reading that audit report. It's not just the site. That audit report isn't just for the site. It's for the certification body, the technical reviewer that's reviewing that audit report. It's also for the buyers that are requesting this audit report. So when a buyer is reviewing it, what they want to try and get is an image. Like I said, it's a window, or it's painting the picture of what that site, the performance of that site, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's what objective evidence is really reporting there. So first off, what you have to do when you're writing these audit reports is collect objective evidence. And collecting and verifying objective evidence is where you start in order for you to write good evidence. So you have to collect the facts. And basically, when you are collecting your objective evidence, you are reporting the facts. And I can't emphasize this enough, because many times when we're auditing, there's always this discussion, and I say that loosely because sometimes it can turn into an argument and sometimes it can turn into a question, and it always is a discussion there. But collecting and verifying the information that you're receiving is important. And when you collect the facts, it's hard to dispute the facts. So you want to make sure that you're collecting only information that is verifiable, only information that is based on facts. And so I put in, what objective evidence is here, and it's qualitative or quantitative information, records or statements of fact pertaining to the safety, and in our case, food safety of an item or service, to the existence and implementation of a food safety system requirement, which is based on observation, measurement, or test, and which can be verified. So that is the key part for us. So it's collecting the facts. So that's where you start. So before you can write any good evidence, you have to collect the facts and collect it. So collecting objective evidence, and how to do that. So what I say is go to Rio. When you're collecting your objective evidence, the first thing you want to do is think, I got to go to Rio. And what does that mean? When you collect your objective evidence, you're looking at reviewing records, you're interviewing staff, and you're observing procedures and practices. Those are the 3 ways to collect your facts and your objective evidence. So go to Rio when you want to collect your objective evidence, and you get your records, your interviews, and your observations. So again, the only way you can collect this objective evidence is to get the facts. So when you're reviewing the records, you're looking at any logs, you're looking at any procedures, you're looking at any policies. And when you're reviewing these records, you're looking to see not only what they're saying they're doing is what they're doing, but also that they're doing the right thing. So make sure that when you're reviewing these records, you're looking to see and all that fact-based information as it relates to the code requirements. Next up, you want to interview staff. And I'll talk about that in just a second. And then the third thing you want to do is observe the policies, or observe the procedures and practices that are being implemented in the program. And when you're observing these, don't let the audit guide dictate what you're doing. Don't let the audit guide run you through the facility fast, because that's what they want to do. They want to move you from one room to the next room, and they want to keep you in a pattern so that as an auditor, they have you under control and they're leading the audit. So as an auditor, you need to take control of the audit and you need to lead the audit. And what that means, and when you're observing, you can't observe as you're walking. I mean, you can, but what you want to try and do is take a moment and just stand there. Because when you're there for a number of minutes, you really then become a part of the entire room, right? So when something's new there, it's new for only a minute or 2. And then after a while, you're just there. And then you'll really be able to see the procedures and practices. So don't let the audit guide, don't let them go ahead and and walk you through that facility. Instead, you need to lead. And sometimes you can mix it up. You can go back to, starting from receiving to shipping, or from shipping to receiving, or go back and revisit some parts of the facility if you need to. So, but make sure that you're not being led through the facility. Instead, you do the leading when you're the auditor. The next part to Rio, well, the middle part actually is interviewing, but I want to talk about interviewing techniques because this is such an important step. Because interviewing, and when you're listening and hearing feedback, that's considered facts, that's considered evidence. So when you're interviewing, it's important to make sure that you're collecting the right evidence. So when you start your interviews, what you first need to do is put the person at ease. And what does that mean, put the person at ease? You want to tell a funny joke, or your trip into to the site? No, simply put the person at ease. You can just simply ask their name. So when you ask their name, that's the first question you're asking, and that person's like, hey, I know the answer to that one. So you just want to introduce yourself. You want to explain why you're there, ask them what their name is, and ask them if it's okay to interview them right now. Hi, my name is Leanne. I'm from the audit company. What's your name? And, oh, hi, my name's Jane. And can I ask you a couple questions, Jane? Everybody likes to be called by their name. So put that person at ease and make them feel comfortable, because they are going to be nervous right from the get-go, simply because they're under the microscope by asking questions. So start off, put the person you're interviewing at ease, and explain your purpose, what you want to do, types of questions you want to ask. And then you really want to make sure you find out what they are doing. So what are you doing here? What's your role here? And then you want to observe what they're doing as well. Show me how you do this function. Ask them open-ended questions. Avoid those yes or no types of questions. Avoid making leading questions like, so you are the person in charge of training, right? And of course the person's going to be like, yeah, absolutely, I'm that person. And so you don't want to answer the question within the question either. So avoid those leading questions, avoid open-ended questions, and really ask them to show you what you're doing, so you can observe what they're doing, that you can ask them questions about what they're doing, where they record the information. And then at the end of it, make a tentative conclusion, and so that you've really looked at all the information and make a tentative conclusion. And if you don't feel like you have enough information, keep going with the questions. And then the one thing that I wanted to also explain with the questions is that there might be instances that they might not understand the question that you're asking. And so you have to be patient and perhaps maybe rephrase the question so that they can understand the question that you're asking. So when you're interviewing this, all your senses are going on, your visual and your listening skills, and as well as your own body language. So all of that is what you're looking at when you're doing these interviews. But it's such an important part when you're doing your audits, is those interviewing techniques and really collecting the facts there, because that's a very important part, the interview techniques. And then the next thing is to thank the person, explain your next steps, and then talk to your audit escort there. So make sure that you have all of that. So the first step in collecting your objective evidence is really collecting the facts and going to Rio. Collecting your records and reviewing records, policies, and procedures, interviewing and having good interview skills with that employee or whoever you're interviewing, and then your observations. And oftentimes, going to Rio can be in one step. So if I'm auditing, or if I'm interviewing somebody about a particular a particular process, such as taking temperatures. I can look at their records. They can observe what they're doing, and I can interview how they're doing it. So a lot of times you can go to Rio and do the one step right there. So then we get into writing objective evidence. So you've collected all your facts, and now you got to put it on your report. And how can you do that? What's the best way to do that? So what you need to first understand is whether what you've collected is in compliance or out of compliance. So you need to understand whether you're going to write your objective evidence, your written evidence, to something that has been reported as meeting the requirements of the code or not meeting the requirements of the code. So when you write it, you have to write it to the specific requirement of the code. So make sure if you're writing, and I'll use food safety as an example, if I'm writing something to the metal detector or foreign material, then I'm writing it to that particular requirement. I'm not going to write it to some other requirement, because that's just going to cause confusion on all parts. And then also write it to the level of the response. So if it's a major nonconformance, write it as a major nonconformance. If it's a minor, or even if it's in compliant, write it to the level of that response. So that's very important to do that. Second, when you're writing it, clearly indicate the evidence of compliance or not compliance. Summary of the elements that are non-compliant. So you might have, so you might also want to include, what they are doing correctly, as well as what they're not doing. So if they are, for personal hygiene, for example, if everybody is washing their hands, that is something you also want to mention. Everybody washed their hands. However, I didn't see any paper towels in the paper towel dispenser or something like that. So summarize the evidence of compliance as well as non-compliance. Also, you could refer to other sections. Many times audits are designed so that elements are interrelated, and especially if there's similar issues that have been identified. So it's reporting all of the facts and gathering all the facts together. And this may or may not occur. It's just an option in case that is there. And then descriptions of the RIO that you went to, the record review, the observations, and the interviews to conduct to support the primary responses for each of the evidence that you've collected. So you need to make sure that you're including everything that you gathered, all the facts that you gathered, to support the level of the response, whether in compliant or out of compliant, or some in and some out. So you need to make sure you do that. You also can include any changes or improvements from previous audits, or you can include references to policies or procedures to really paint that picture. So you want to be specific yet concise. You don't want to write something too long that people don't read, but you want to make sure that you're collecting the right information and putting that all into the report. And when possible, quantify. So when you are looking at something, you want to quantify it, and that helps paint that picture. So you could say 2 out of 3 people were interviewed, and what they said was they all washed their hands. Or 1 out of 25 people washed their hands. It makes a big difference than, 24 out of 25 washed their hands. So quantify when possible. So include that number in there if you can. And then speak the language of the site. So when you are in a room, make sure you know what the name of that room is. If this is the training room, or if this is the manufacturing room, or the packaging room, or the receiving, or the processing room 2, whatever it is, but speak the language of the site. And especially when it comes to this types of equipment, this could be a kettle, this could be the packaging machine, this could be the blow mold, whatever it might be, but make sure that you speak the language of the site. And that includes even referencing policy numbers, procedures, whatever it might be. but it's important to speak the language of that site. And then I can't emphasize enough that spelling and grammar are important. You want to be clear, concise, and oftentimes as a technical writer myself, I love bullets. Obviously, I love bullets, but you can write in bullets. You don't have to write, Moby Dick, for example, but make sure that spelling and grammar, when needed, are very important. A couple things to avoid is just rewriting or rewording the code requirements. So in our examples, we have specific code requirements, and oftentimes all auditors do is just rewrite the code requirement. And I want to say, especially it's in compliance, right? So they just rewrite the code requirement. And I want to say, I know that they've done all that because it's a compliant to that code requirement. What I want to know is what you learned from Rio. I want to know the records. I want to know the interviews. I want to know the observations that helped you conclude that this requirement is in compliance. And also don't avoid writing simple statements such as no issues observed. That doesn't show anything to what the site has done to earn this level of response. So avoid no issues observed, or just avoid rewriting that code requirement as well. So I want to share with you some examples that we received to kind of give you an idea as to some of the challenges that we face when we're reviewing audit reports. So I have several mini examples here, and I just kind of want to give you an idea. So you're looking at these, and I'm giving you some time to review it. So the first one, and I just put the element to the code required, to our SQF code requirement up there. We have 3 levels of nonconformance: minor, major, and critical. And then we have obviously 1 level of compliance, which is just compliant. So the first example is regarding written food safety plans. And the objective evidence, if you can read it, actually just absolutely makes no sense. It's vague, there are misspellings, it's incomplete. I mean, you have where it says UCFM monitoring records through HACCP plants. It should be plans with the S, PLANS. And just, if you continue to read it, it makes absolutely no sense. And I'm sure the auditor meant well, and when they read it, it probably meant something to them because they were on site. But understand who the audience is. The audience isn't just the site and the personnel that participated in the audit, but it's also based off the retailer that could possibly review it, or the buyer. Also looking at the corporate of the site, or the plant manager, for example, that wasn't a part of the full audit. So it's vague and misspelling. The second one, 2631, it's about complaint management. And this one, they said it was compliant. And it states that the recall procedures were reviewed, recall notification form is used, SQFI and the CB need to be included on the recall contact list, and that the site added SQF and the CB to the contact list before the audit was complete. And so for this, consulting was written into the evidence. I'm not sure if you noticed it, but the second sentence that says SQFI and the CB need to be included on the recall contact list. That's basically stating exactly what the site needs to do. And so what's going to happen is the site's going to say, okay, all I need to do is include SQF and the CB on the recall contact list. And that's not appropriate. So an auditor should not provide consulting advice. An auditor is there to provide the facts, not provide advice. And the second part in it with SQF, a nonconformance is a nonconformance. You can't correct it on site. And so the issue for us as well is that this is marked compliant when it should have be marked as a nonconformance, probably a minor, but it is a nonconformance because the site added it while the auditor was there. However, for us, that is not okay to do. The third example that I have is about facility design. And basically the objective evidence, and it was a primary response, was a major nonconformance. The objective evidence was that floors were pitted, bottom of the wall in the room was pitted. And for food safety purposes, this is a big issue. It could be that the floors were pitted and cracked and supported bacteria or pathogens, microorganisms in the floor itself. So for us, though, we don't know if it should be a major. We don't even know if it should be compliant, because I don't know where these floors are pitted. I don't know where I am, right? So remember the one of the tips is find out where you are and the types of equipment that are in the room. And so the location and issue really isn't that clear enough to warrant to a major nonconformance. So when you're writing your evidence, you need to make sure you have enough supporting facts to support the primary response. Then the other one on this page is the last one, is regarding foreign material control. And at this primary response, the auditor marked exempt because the site doesn't have a metal detector. And so for us, this is not written to the requirement. The requirement is about foreign material control. And for food safety purposes, for having a metal detector is one way to control foreign material, but it's not the only way. So that means that what this auditor said is that this site is exempt from any type of foreign material control just because they don't have a metal detector. What I want to know is how are they controlling the issues of foreign material? So that's what I want to try. That's what I want to get out of it. So for us, the issue is that this isn't written to the requirement of the SQF code. Moving on, we have a few more examples. So I want to provide you with this summary response that we received from an auditor. And this is for one site. I'm not going to obviously list the site, but this is to one of our requirements, 212. It's regarding an organizational chart that it's in place, identifies position responsible for the food safety program, including descriptions of responsibility. The reporting structure is documented and communicated to all levels of the organization. The interrelationship for food safety is defined. The document provides a snapshot of how positions interact and share responsibility. I'm like, well, that's a well-written response. And you think, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it is that it could easily be copy-pasted into another audit report, and this is exactly what this auditor did. So they copy-pasted what was from one audit report basically into another audit report. And when you do this, you risk the integrity of the audit report, especially when you get to using pronouns, when you get to the quality manager, he said blah, 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 or he did this, or even form numbers, form number ABC. So what happens then is when you copy paste, you're copy and pasting the form number as well as the pronoun, the gender specific, and it could be a he at one facility and a she at another facility. So avoid the copy paste syndrome when you're writing your audit reports. The next example that I want to share with you is regarding the written evidence here. So if you look at this sectional summary that we have, it says there was evidence that food delivered to customers did not meet applicable regulations. No regulatory actions have been against the supplier's product. SQF and the certification body are notified in writing within 24 hours of identification of a food safety event observed on the recall SOP. And on the second instance, it's regarding production prerequisite programs missing employee training, recall, customer complaint verification and validation, etc., also missing our verification of the prerequisite programs. So you see that there's a lot of things that were not done, but there are so that there's evidence that says they weren't done, but yet the primary response is in compliance. So these are all compliant, but yet in the sectional summary, it's stating that it didn't meet it. So the sectional summary does not reflect that primary response. So when you're writing this, when we're reading this, we're thinking, why wasn't this marked as some kind of non-conformance? So when you're writing your report, again, make sure you're writing it to not only the code requirement, but also to the level of the primary response. The other example is regarding the sectional summary itself. It states here, the grounds and area surrounding the premises shall be maintained to minimize dust and be kept free of waste or accumulated debris so as not to attract pests and vermin, roadways and loading and unloading, and maintained so as not to present a hazard to the food safety operation of the premises, right? So that's really good, but this is literally copied from our code requirements, a combination of two code requirements. So I applaud the auditor for blending two together, but basically they just copy pasted what the code requirement was. And I want to say, I know it's compliant because you marked these compliant. However, you can't just copy paste the code requirements. You've got to come up with the RIO. You've got to share the records, the interviews, and the observations, the facts that you collected in order to support the level of the response. So that we need to make sure that we have all that in place. So here's an example of what I want to share of good evidence. So here's an example of good report evidence. So the sectional summary talks about the document control methods, the responsibility and maintenance are current and functioning well, a responsibility of the systems and operations manager. They name the particular procedure document, so procedure P220, documents, control, and records. Key documents are available upon the production lines, for example, bin, tip, record, etc., with the date. The latest document is available online. Key documents are available. So they go through and they do provide a nice, concise summary as to how this particular site met the requirements for document control. It provides a sectional summary of how the site is meeting the intent behind the requirement. It does include the facts. It includes the records that the auditor reviewed, the dates of the records, and specific procedures that the auditor reviewed. And it also includes specific people that they interviewed. So they included the records, the name of the records, the interviews, and the observations that they saw, that they looked at the responsibility of maintenance. They looked at the responsibility of the document control methods and what it was functioning well. So they really did go to RIO and look at the records, the interviews, and the observations on this particular code requirement. So it is a great example of writing writing objective evidence. Again, it's concise, it's descriptive, it provides a background and the facts. It has good grammar, it reads well, and it really provides good description of what we're looking for when it comes to writing objective evidence. So this was a great example of report writing. So, you know, it's just, I know this is a short presentation, and I just kind of wanted to share with you what we observed within SQF and some of the challenges that we're seeing when reports are being written. But really, what we want you to take away is that the written evidence that you're providing is basically a window to the audit conclusion. It is, it describes what the auditor is seeing, that good, the bad, and the ugly, and it paints a picture for those that aren't able to participate. And it also is a great memory aid for when you go back and you re-audit that facility. So you're looking at previous audit conclusions, and when you're don't have that good written evidence, it's hard to go back and say whether that site is even repeating or is improving in how their performance is. The second thing I want you to take away from this presentation is that you need to gather the facts. You need to head to RIO. You need to look at the records. You need to evaluate the records to make sure not just what they're doing, what they're saying they're doing, but that they're doing the right thing. So you got to gather the facts and in the records. In the interviews, make sure that you have good interviews, that you're honing in on your interview skills. You're putting the person at ease. You're asking open-ended questions. You're asking them to show you to do things, or where do you record this information? And you're thanking that individual for letting you interview them today, and you're providing tentative conclusions. And a couple things, even with interviews, again, like I stated before, remember that your question, they might not understand how you phrased the question. You're interviewing all types of levels, so you need to perhaps restate the question just in case it wasn't asked the first way. So you could do that, if they don't understand the question. And lastly, when you're going to RIO, is observations. And when you're collecting your observations, the facts for observations, again, don't let that site dictate how you want the audit to go. You lead the site. If you want to stay there and observe for 15 minutes, do that. Half hour, do that. If you want to go and come back and do some more observations, do that, especially in high risk areas or areas that you might need to have. Maybe you had some questions about it. Maybe there was an audit trail that you needed to go down. But again, when the first way for written evidence is to gather the facts, and to do that, go to RIO. And then lastly, to write clear evidence, you need to make sure that you represent not just that you represent the requirement and the level of the response. When you're writing your evidence, be clear and concise, be professional, and use spell check, and make sure you have right grammar. Don't just rewrite the code requirement, include the facts. When you're writing it, don't avoid copy and pasting. We all have a tendency to copy and paste because we write something really well and we want to continue to use that. And if you're using it as a template, that's one thing, but just simply copy pasting, I've seen many examples where it's a simple copy paste from one to the other. And like I said, even the pronouns, the auditor isn't even changing the pronouns when it comes to one audit to the other. So be professional when you're writing your objective evidence. And with that, I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for listening in on what I wanted to share with you with effective report writing, and share with you some of the issues that we're seeing. I think oftentimes we learn by seeing what not to do, not just what to do, but also what not to do. So hopefully you got a little bit more information out of this session, and how you can write better reports for your client. And with that, I want to thank you and send it back to Jane. So thanks again.
Thanks, Leanne. That concludes today's presentation.